So 50 Shades Freed, which is the...
Freed.
Freed.
F-R-E-E-D.
Yes, as in...
Not in threed, because I'm not sure I could cope with that.
50 Shades Freed, yeah. So, I mean, a little bit of history, just to put this in context. So, the novels began life as a piece of online Twilight fan fiction. And the first 50 Shades film was directed by Sam Taylor Johnson, who really sort of struggled to make a silk purse out of the tin-eared source. But she kind of worked quite hard to make it work. The script ended up being written by Kelly Marcel, but there was famously a point at which she had got Patrick Marber in to do rewrites on it. And then Patrick Marber, his ideas were thrown out by E.L. James, and they basically had to stick to what E.L. James had written. Patrick Marber was then interviewed on the radio and very graciously said, look, you know, it's her creation. It's E.L. James's creation. I'm not going to complain about the fact that what she did was she defended her creation. But what then happened was that it became much more something that was kind of controlled by E.L. James in the next two issues. So essentially, we lost the interesting director, the potentially interesting writer, and they brought on board James Foley. Now, Foley is an interesting case because in the past he has made films like After Dark, My Sweet, which is, I think, is a really good piece of work. Fear, which is kind of a straight-to-video erotic thriller, but dressed up as, you know, something a little bit different. And, you know, Glengarrick Ross, he's somebody who has done interesting work in the past, but he was brought on as a safe pair of hands. And the script duties were given to Neil Leonard, who, of course, is E.L. James's partner, who was basically doing exactly what was required by her as the original writer of the books and as the overseeing producer of the films. So, total control exerted from the top. This is how it's going to be. And James Foley just, you know, holding the wheel as a safe pair of hands. So the second film, whereas there was some interesting stuff in the film, I didn't think the first was great. I think it was terrible. I mean, it was certainly the whole thing about, you know, it's about S&M, except it isn't. I mean, if you look at a film like Barbette Schroeder's Maitresse, or even if it ended up making you think of the glory days of 9.5 Weeks. And it reminded me, of course, because Kim Basinger was involved in the series, it reminded me, of course, that there was at one point a more difficult version of 9.5 Weeks that ended up being cut back because audiences didn't want it to be challenging. They just wanted it to be Mickey Rourke throwing the contents of his fridge at Kim Basinger, and that was as far as they were willing to go. So now we get to the third instalment. And the first one, you know, Christian was a dangerous bad boy. Christian Grey was a dangerous bad boy. The second one, he was kind of reining in, becoming the perfect man. Now in the third one, they've got married, and they're attempting to set up home with Anastasia in the driving seat.
Gia. It is Gia, right? I'm sure you're very good at what you do. Otherwise, Christian wouldn't have asked for your input. But please stop speaking to my husband as if I weren't here.
Anna. I have designed many prestige projects.
You may call me Mrs. Grey. And this is not a prestige project. This is going to be our home. So, if you want this job, I suggest you stop making eyes at my husband and keep your hands to yourself.
Look, I'm sorry, Mrs. Grey, but I would never. It won't happen again.
Everything okay?
Yeah. We were just discussing an alternative approach. Something less in your face, more respectful.
Now, I haven't seen this film.
But you kind of have.
My guess is that she does carry on.
No, she doesn't, because she's been more at the beginning of the film. But basically, what it is, you know, Anastasia making her own rules, and if the character arc of the story would be her finding her feet, her asserting her identity, while he goes through a series of fairly unbelievable conniptions to end up in a place that, you know, they both consensually want to be. So the problem with it is this. Firstly, I mean, it's really not very good, but that doesn't kind of matter because it has an inbuilt audience. And I've had so many, you know, cinema managers tell me, you know, believe me, the film opens, it packs out, and it packs out with a largely female crowd, of which you are not one of and I'm absolutely not the core audience for this. And I don't quite understand the amount of vitriol and anger it inspires, because it's very, very bland. In this third instalment, if something that is sort of nominally an erotic thriller goes more for the thriller bits. I mean, there's car chases. I mean, rubbish car chases, but car chases. There's, scheming, plotting going on in the background. It goes much closer to the kind of plot that you would have had from a straight-to-video erotic thriller, or even, a Paul Verhoeven movie, although Paul Verhoeven would never direct a movie that was this bland or that was this completely to do with surfaces. All the stuff that's really happening in terms of the erotica is to do with the possessions. It's to do with the cars. It's to do with the jet plane. She is constantly looking around and going, wow, what, you own that? You own this? You own him? You own everything you own. And so it becomes completely a sort of aspirational lifestyle achievement thing. I mean, funnily enough, if you compare that central couple with the central couple in Loveless, you'd have to say that, from a sort of aspirational point of view, they both want the same things. All the S&M stuff is very much in the background, is very much vanilla, is very much just kind of, accoutramental side dressing. It's no longer the centre of the story. The centre of the story has now become something that much closer approximates a thriller. And it's not thrilling. The dialogue is very terrible. And the problem, therefore, is that the actors have to wrestle with very terrible dialogue. And again, I think it's not fair to say, for example, Jamie Dornan is kind of, uninspiring in that central role, because Jamie Dornan is wrestling with lines which no one should have to wrestle with. And Dakota Johnson does as decent a job as it's possible to do with those lines. And we've seen her in loads of other films in which she's, perfectly fine and good and interesting. So it just felt terribly corporate, pretty dull, some really skull-scrapingly bad dialogue, but lots of visual sort of pop video surface sheen, something approaching character progression, but not really. I mean, I don't for 1 minute believe in any of these people, any of these situations, any of the allegedly erotic tension between them. I just don't believe in any of it. What it looks like is like somebody taking a book and then doing a TV version of the book. And if that's what you want, that's what it is, and it will play completely to its core audience. I mean, I do think the core audience will feel slightly like, okay, we have been here before. But if you're a film fan, all the interest, what interest there was in the first film, because it was, it was interesting to see Sam Taylor Johnson and Kelly Marcel and E.L. James, making this thing was then so enormously successful. And you could feel, at least in that first film, that Sam Taylor Johnson was trying to do something. But by the time you got to, once it was over to James Foley, Foley is so much in the back seat that there is no evidence of the stuff that he's done in the past. It now looks like absolutely televised pop video, material gains stuff.
Is that it
with
now?
With the ropiest? I hope so. I mean, yes, I think it. I think that's it. I think it's all done. But I would say once again, I don't get people being angry or furious about it. It's not terrible. It's just